Welcome everyone. Great to have you join ORTJET for this webinar this morning. For those of you who are new to ORTJET, we are an organization that supports entrepreneurs in the Jewish community through mentorship, networking, and training. If you would like to know more, please contact Brenna or me. Today we have the privilege of hearing from Michael Walker. Michael's working life has always been involved with the English language. With his extensive experience in teaching and training in South Africa and Israel, his business, The Language Boss, is a training company that focuses on communication skills training in the workplace. His key clients include Allen Gray, Cape Union Mart, Clicks, Coronation, Investec, Old Mutual, and Woolworths, to name but a few. A reminder to everyone to please keep your microphones on mute. Michael, thank you for giving of your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Lisa. Just indicate if the sound's not good, Lisa, but I'm just going to take it that it is good. All right, so today's session is called Better Email in 60 Minutes. And just by way of introduction, this session is based on a longer course that I run. In fact, it's almost a 12-hour business writing course that runs over 2 days. But what I've taken for this session is really what I believe are the key principles and tips that I think if you apply them, you will be writing better email. So just to give you an overview of where we're going today, I'm going to talk through 3 principles. Put your reader first, be plain, and be professional. And then I'm going to talk through 3 tips. Write good subject lines, get your tone right, edit, and proofread. And then at the end, we'll see how we go, but we'll probably have a time for Q&A at the end. But what I want to say very definitely is that this is not just a 1-hour lecture, that I would ask you to ask questions as we go. I'd love your participation. If it really gets out of hand, I will close you, shut you down, and move us on. But please ask questions as we go. So preferably, I would like you to unmute yourself and ask the question. Alternatively, if that you're not comfortable with that, then just put the question in the chat, and I will try and keep an eye on the chat as we go. So I'm going to ask you a number of questions as we go, though, and hopefully you can answer them. And to kick us off, I'm going to ask you 2 questions about 2 quotes that I'm going to put on the board. So this is the first quote to take us into this session. What is written without effort is generally read without pleasure. And the second quote is, what good writing makes the reader feel smart, while bad writing makes the writer feel smart. So I'll give you half a minute just to reflect on those 2 quotes. And my question to you is this: what connects these 2 quotes? Or we could phrase it slightly differently. What do these 2 quotes have in common? So if anyone wants to tackle an answer or offer an answer for those questions, I'll be very happy to hear from you. So I'll give you half a minute just to reflect. Okay, anyone out there, what connects these 2 quotes? Okay, great. I see there's one answer. I'm going to jump in and have a look. Very good. And the first answer gets it straight away. I'm going to just read it. It says, it relates to the way it makes the reader feel. And then there's some others. That good writing takes effort, 100%. And yes, I think there are a number of things that connect these quotes. I'm zoning in on that very first answer. Let me just see what else there was. Good writing is determined by how it is perceived by the reader. Very nice. Okay, and 100%. I think what what connects these quotes is in fact the word read. There's the verb, reader, the noun. What is connecting these quotes saying good writing is about the reader's experience. Now, this might sound glaringly obvious, but it in fact takes us into the very first principle, which is put your reader first. And as I say, this sounds very obvious because everything you write has a reader. But simply, I think, due to human nature, we lose sight of that we sit down to write something and we're very consumed with what's in our head and we're thinking about what we need to say, and we lose sight of the fact that there's actually someone going to be reading what we're writing. So the first principle is put your reader first. Think hard about your reader before you start writing. And in fact, what we would say is you should become reader-centered as opposed to writer-centered. And you should be reader-centered, I would argue 90% of the time. Yes, there are cases where writer-centered writing might serve you, but 90% of the time, maybe more, reader-centered writing is going to serve you far more. So what do we mean by reader-centered writing? So first of all, it's planned with your reader squarely in mind. And I stress the word planned, that even before you started writing, you are thinking about who am I writing to, as opposed to what am I writing about. Yes, what you're writing about is important, but the who has to come first. Reader-centered writing responds to your reader's needs and answers their likely questions. So as you're sitting down planning, you're thinking, what does my reader need out of this document, this email? What questions might they have that I need to answer? Very importantly, reader-centered writing uses predominantly the pronouns you and yours. So what I mean by this is, at a most basic level, at a word level, if you are reader-centered, you'll be using more you and yours as opposed to I and we and my. Okay, and often it's not the only factor, but it's often a very good measure that if you're asking yourself the question, am I reader-centered or writer-centered? Just look at your pronoun use. Are you using more you and yours than my and I and ours? And if you are, you're likely more reader-centered than writer-centered. Reader-centered writing is highly readable. And yes, that makes a lot of sense because as we take from those quotes above, good writing is all about the reader's experience. And in fact, when it comes to business writing, especially workplace writing, what we want to aim to do is reduce what we call the cognitive load of the reader. So what do we mean by cognitive load? It's just a fancy term for brain power or brain usage. We want to make it as easy as possible for the reader. So highly readable writing does that. And there are many things that contribute to readability. We'll touch on one or two later. Reader-centered writing recognizes a few truths about human nature. So there are a few truths we need to recognize. People are self-centered. They want to know what's in it for me. It's just how we are. So as a good reader-centered writer, you need to answer that question. People expect courtesy and people are defensive. Yes, and especially just that last point first, when it comes to email is just that medium where if we can misinterpret, we will misinterpret. Now, as a good reader-centered writer, you need to be aware of that before you start writing. And the second point, people expect courtesy. Yes, work very hard to be courteous when writing email. Again, it relates to that point that we just very easily misinterpret what's written to us. So yes, I'm not saying every single email needs to be courteous. There'll be moments when you are not courteous. You might be glaringly rude. But if you do that consciously, that's totally fine. But you don't want to be discourteous or rude because you haven't thought hard enough about your reader or you're not conscious enough. So here are some examples, and this is very much at a sentence level, of a writer-centered versus a reader-centered sentence. So take a look at this. This is writer-centered. We need to know how many copies we have to produce. Now, we know this is writer-centered just purely by looking at the pronouns. We. It's all about the writer. How can we make that reader-centered? Will you confirm how many copies you need? Now, we've inserted yous instead of we's. So now we're speaking to the reader. But I think if you read those sentences, your response will just be very different to them. You'll feel the second sentence is addressing you. It's speaking to you as a reader. It'll engage you more. So here's one for you to try. And if you want, you can unmute yourself, speak it out, or you can type it in the chat. I'll have another look. Here is a writer-centered sentence. And I want you to make it reader-centered. So we dispatched the order this morning to arrive by the end of July. So again, I'm going to give you half a minute. I'll check the chat, see if anyone's brave enough to tackle it. And I want you to turn that into a reader-centered sentence. Let me see, something's up. Okay, first out, you will receive, thank you, Greg. You will receive your order by the end of July. Very nice. Sophia, you can expect your order to arrive by the end of July. Very nice. Okay, maybe some of you were mentally thinking about it. So thanks for that, Greg and Sophia. So here we go. This was my answer. I think yours are great as well. Your order was dispatched this morning and you should receive it by the end of July. So there again, we've replaced the pronouns we with your and you. It's addressing the reader more directly. You will certainly feel a lot more engaged as a reader reading that sentence. Just check one last answer. Noreen, thank you. Your order was sent today and it should reach you in July. Very nice. Okay, so you get the idea, but I need to stress reader-centeredness goes from a word level, a sentence level, right up to a whole document level. This is very much focusing this slide at the sentence level. So here's another question for you. Why make your writing reader-centered? And I must be honest, I normally run the session with a far smaller group. So I actually give them little prompts like this. But I want to ask you, you can reflect on this mentally. It'll be great if a few of you can put your answers in the chat. Why is it a good idea to make your writing reader-centered? And if you can come up with 3 points, that'll be great. So again, I'm going to give you half a minute. I'm already getting answers. 1 second. It makes it more personal. Thank you, Janine. Definitely. Anyone else? Sophia, thank you. Everybody loves talking about themselves. Okay. Engages the reader. Yes, definitely. Reader-centered writing is going to engage the reader because I think tying in with what Sophia says, we like being spoken to. We like knowing it's about us. Yes, I mean, that's just how we are. So if you can give that to the reader, you're going to do a much better job. Might get a better response. Definitely. Thanks, Joel. Makes what you write relevant. Definitely. Reader feels heard. Okay, very nice. The great answers coming in. So I'm going to add on to those some of my own answers, but I think you get it because I think, and this is the thing, it's not high science. It's pretty common sense when you start thinking about it. So here are some more reasons. Readers will respond better, and I think that was one of the answers. They'll respond better if they feel that the writers understood them. Definitely. They will feel that in the relationship, they are the most important person, and that's great. Now, we're getting to this point, and especially it's echoed in the next point, where what I'm saying almost sounds mildly manipulative, that we are putting the reader first because it's going to serve our ends. Now, it is mildly manipulative, but I think it's towards a good end because so much of business writing or business writing is what we call transactional. What do you mean by this? Is it aims to bring about a result. Almost everything you write brings about a result. Now, if you want to maximize the chance of getting the result from what you've written, you want to make the recipient feel that they're valued and appreciated. That's a good thing. And in fact, this is the principle that I think you could extend to communication generally. It's not just writing. You need to value the recipient, but don't do it from mildly manipulative motives. You do it with the best intentions because this is good communication. Last point, I'm going to add to yours as well. Reader-centered writing combats information overload. So why do I say this? Because if you thought hard about your reader, you are only giving them what they need. You're only answering the questions they have. You're not giving them a whole lot of additional unnecessary information. And so from that perspective, it combats information overload. And this can only be a good thing because, as we know, there's just too much information flying around. Okay, so it brings us to a close on the first principle. Put your reader first. I said I'll take questions as we go, so I'll pause just momentarily to see if there are any questions. Otherwise, we will have we'll have a brief Q&A right at the end. Okay, great. Nothing coming in. Let me carry on. So it takes us to the next principle, which is be plain. Now, what are we saying here is really a few things, but it's kind of captured with this acronym KISS, which can be variously interpreted. But for my purposes, keep it short and simple. You need to keep your writing short and simple. This has implications from a word level to a sentence level, right up to a whole document level. This is really the most basic point about being plain, is use normal language. Don't use fancy, formal, pompous language. Why? And I think that ties a lot to that first quote. Fancy, formal, pompous language makes the writer feel clever. And as we established at the beginning in that quote, that's not good writing. Good writing makes the reader feel clever. So use normal language. At a sentence level, write short, simple sentences. So what's the guideline? The guideline is 15 to 20 words per sentence. And that's an average of 15 to 20 words per sentence, I should say, within the entire document. So of course, it means some sentences will be longer, some will be shorter, but your average should be 15 to 20 words. As a maximum sentence length, no sentence should be longer than 30 words. That's the guideline. Be human. So what I mean by this is avoid those standard plug-in phrases. And we all know them, and we've all been guilty of using them. Things like, herewith, please find attached. Okay, I'm sure you've all used them. Things like, should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Now, these sound relatively innocent, but you stack up enough of these plug-in phrases, and it almost becomes as if a human hadn't written the email. So don't use these plug-in phrases. They alienate the reader. They distance the reader. And you want to do everything to engage the reader. And finally, and this is, I must stress, a limited list, but I think if you got these things right, you're going a long way. Use active voice. Now, I think on almost any writing course you go on, you're going to be told to use active versus passive. Active makes your writing more engaging, more plain. But before I say too much more, I wanted to have a little detour and focus on active versus passive. So here's a question for you. Put it in the chat. Which of these two sentences is active and which is passive? And okay, I'm going to just pause momentarily because Lisa posed a very nice question, and then I'll come back to this. Lisa asked, what do you use instead of plug-in phrases? So here's the guideline, is that you ask yourself the question, if the person was standing in front of you, would you use that language? So if you were standing in front of me, Lisa, would I go, Lisa, here with the document you requested? If I did, you would laugh at me like you are now. So you say to yourself, if I was standing in front of the person, what would I say? What normal language I say? I would say something like, Lisa, here's the document you asked for. Normal language. And this takes us into the whole realm of spoken versus written. Yes, we don't want to use spoken language in writing. Writing is still writing. But in terms of phrase and vocabulary, just use normal language. Don't use language or phrases you wouldn't use if you were talking to the person face to face. Okay, so which is active, which is passive? I got one answer from Janine. 2 is active, 1 is passive. Very good. And I'm going to presume everyone else got that answer. But yes, 2 is active and 1 is passive. And our advice is use active, or predominantly use active. So if you think you haven't quite got that, here's a challenge for you. Here's a passive sentence. The question of extended leave will be considered by management. So I'm going to give you half a minute. And I want you to turn that into an active sentence and speak it out, but I see no one's really speaking. So write it in the chat, which is totally fine. And I want to see if anyone gets it. I'm giving you half a minute. Make that sentence active. Okay, let me just see. We have an answer. Management is considering the question of extended leave. Yes, very good, except the tense has slightly changed, but yes, it is now active. But the whole point, and it's very quick back to school, you want to get this. Management is what we call the agent. It's the thing causing the action. Just saying, I've got a few more coming in. Management will consider extended leave. Yes, we got the tense. Management will consider the question of extended leave. 100% Greg. So what have we done? Let me put up the answer. There we go. We had to keep the form. Don't change the tense. So we've got the agent, what we technically call the agent. We've moved it in front of the action, or what's also called the verb, of course. That's what makes it active, is you get the agent, the thing or person causing the verb. It has to come before the action in the sentence. Okay, I don't want to get too lost in active and passive, but just to finish this off, what is wrong with the passive? This is what's wrong with the passive. It makes your writing sound formal, impersonal, and bureaucratic. Now, you might want to sound like that, but you have to have a very good reason for sounding like that. You don't want to sound like that because you haven't thought hard about your writing. Passive also increases cognitive load for your reader, because that's not how we think. So there we're coming back to this term cognitive load, just meaning you're creating work for the reader's brain. And it's not how we think. What I mean by that is that we don't think in the passive. We think in the active. And passive, as far as our brains is concerned, is abstract. It's not, we have to, every passive we send, we receive, we have to rephrase in the active. You don't believe me? I'll give you a very quick sentence. Process this. The red bus was hit by the blue car. Now, I don't have time to get all your answers, but when I ask people this question often, they go, some people get confused. They go, I say to them, what do you see in your mind's eye? And they go, I see a red bus hitting a blue car. And they get confused. Yes, the answer is, what do you see in your mind's eye? You see a blue car hitting a red bus. But the sentence, the red bus was hit by the blue car, is passive. In our minds, to process it, we have to go, the blue car hit the red bus. So by writing in the passive, you're getting your reader to do work. So active writing is shorter, easier to read and process, more human and engaging. Bottom line, it reduces cognitive load for your reader because that is how we think. Now remember, this is coming underneath plain. And there are many things that relate to plain language. Plain language is a very big area. We mentioned some. Short, simple sentences. Use normal language, not formal language. Write in the active. Put that together, you're going to start being a more plain writer. And plain is not in any way derogatory or meaning dumbing down. You're doing your reader a big favor. Okay, I'll pause momentarily. Any questions before we go to the next principle? Okay, nothing yet. All right, so let's move on. Principle 3 is be professional. Now, this word professional is thrown around a lot. Everyone's got to be professional. We've got to behave professionally. And yes, we also have to write professionally. But before I give you my answers, I want to ask you, what does it mean to you to be professional when writing email? And again, I'm just going to pause momentarily. I want you just to reflect on this. What does it mean to be professional when writing emails? And please put some answers in the chat if you want, and I'll check it out. Some coming in. Respectful, very nice. No slang or abbreviations, definitely. Polite and respectful, good. Yes, very nice, Sion. Friendly, I like that a lot. Clear and to the point, no emojis, definitely not. Yeah, credibility, that's an interesting one. We could definitely unpack that, but I think that means, I'm going to take it that you're believable. You can be trusted. You've got credibility. Okay, very nice. So what I'm very pleased to see, and maybe you were thinking this, it's sometimes when I ask this question, what does it mean to be professional? People say formal. So they make this equation, professional equals formal. I'm very glad no one wrote it. Maybe you were thinking it. But that does not make you professional. So in fact, I would go as far as saying formal writing, especially in an email, but we could extend it to all business writing. Formal writing is, in fact, I think these days, unprofessional. Why? Just simply from the perspective that you're creating a lot of work for your reader. You're not engaging them. All your answers are spot on. Let me add a few more. Put your reader first, and I think that would tie with friendliness, respectfulness. Be human. Yes, that ties in is really the counter argument to the formality. Don't be formal. It's just not human. Be polite. You had it. Thank you. Correct grammar and punctuation. This we can't escape. This is definitely a measure of your professionality. Are you using grammar correctly? Are you punctuation correctly? And maybe if we came at it from the opposite, bad punctuation, bad grammar, it marks you out as very unprofessional. And spelling, says Melissa, absolutely. So you have to get these things right. Grammar, punctuation, spelling. People are very harsh when it comes to this. They will judge you very severely. There are lots of people out there who are very happy to pick out or point out your grammar mistakes, your punctuation errors. And they will judge you, and then they will judge your organization. And this is where your professionality will start going down if you don't get it right. Write in full sentences. So why do I say that? I'm just going to look at a question quickly. Joel asks, what about conversational emails? Yeah, I think every workplace email, and I guess that question is going towards grammar, punctuation. Every workplace email should be punctuated correctly. The grammar should be used correctly. I think it has to be the default. Yes, if it's internal, you might let it slide slightly, but I just think you should be using every opportunity to get it right and practice it. So what am I saying about writing full sentences? Why do I say that? Is because we live in a day and age where we don't write in full sentences. So technically, a not full sentence is called a fragment. Where do we use a lot of fragments? In WhatsApp, in SMSs. We write almost entirely in fragments. My innocent example is something like, see you later. Okay, that's a fragment because it's missing the subject. Who's going to be the seeing? Who's doing the seeing? Now, from the context, it's probably clear, but when it comes to workplace writing, it's terrible when people start writing emails using fragments. So I believe this is professional to write, or let's go the other way, fragments are unprofessional. Write in full sentences. Okay, a few more points. Get the tone right. I'm going to touch on this again. It's one of the tips. I'm not going to say too much here. Don't use formal language. I said that already. Don't be familiar. Definitely not. Now, this can be linked to language, but familiarity is talking about your perception of the relationship, between you and the recipient. Don't be familiar. But at the other end, don't be aloof. So you need to find, and often it's a fine line, or you have to find that balance. You don't want to be familiar, but you don't want to be aloof. And very nice, someone used the word friendly, which is great, which are kind of the 3 Fs, formal, familiar, friendly. The first 2 you don't want, the last one you do want. You want to be friendly. What's wrong with being friendly? And it's often this hard balance to strike. You want to be friendly, but remain professional. But that is business writing. I just want to check quickly a comment. Grammar and spelling is different between one and another. American English, not the same British. So what does one do then? So here's the thing, is that South Africa follows British English. So we spell as British. And that is what I guess our default is. That's what our settings should be set on, as British English, or even you can sometimes set it as South African English. But that's our default. Even if you are writing to an American audience, or let's say you've got American clients, I don't believe you need to adapt your spelling for them. You're coming from a background that follows British English, for good or bad, consistently just apply that. The only exception I might say is you might be, for example, an American-owned company working in South Africa. In that case, you follow what's prescribed by the organization. Last point quickly, and I guess this relates to professional. Belinda said, don't be emotional. Yes, 100%. You don't want to be emotional. That is a mark of unprofessionality as well. Okay, before we get on to the 3 tips, any last question on be professional from anyone? Okay, so let's move on. It brings us to a close. Whoops, let me go back there. The 3 principles: put your reader first, be plain, be professional. I'm going to move into the 3 tips. We will move a little bit faster through these. The first tip is write good subject lines. Now, you don't want to do what Home is doing there. You don't want to put your whole email in the subject line. Now, you might laugh at this. You might think this is crazy. You'd never do it. But believe it or not, it happens. Terrible. So what are some guidelines for good subject lines? First off, your subject line should give your reader a very good idea what your email is about. Now, this ties in nicely with something we pushed right from the beginning of putting your reader first, being very courteous, being polite. You're doing your reader a big favor if they can read your subject line and they get a very good idea what your email is about. Subject line, one way to understand a good subject line is it's a nutshell version of your key message. So what I mean by this is every email you write has a key message. What is the key message? The key message is the one thing that you want your reader to remember if they forget everything else in your email. What is the key message? It could be called the key takeaway. And every email you write has to have one. And then following the next piece of advice is get that key message to the top of your email, or as close as to the top of the email as possible. The subject line is then a condensed version of the key message. And this is great because if you're struggling to write a good subject line, it means that you're probably not so sure what your key message is, which means maybe you need to go back and clarify. Because if you're not sure, how do you expect your reader to be sure? So there's this nice connection between key message and subject line. And finally, 3 words that describe good subject lines: specific, descriptive, and informative. That's what your subject lines have to achieve. They need to be specific, descriptive, and informative. Okay, let me pause a moment. Any questions about subject lines? Okay, nothing coming in. So let me go on to tip number 2. Get your tone right. Now, yes, hang on, there's a question. I'm going to pause a moment. Yes, subject lines are hard to get right, but it's such a good measure of whether you are clear about your key message. And that's why you need to put in the work, because it helps you be sure that you are clear. But also, as I said, it's doing a big favor to your reader. So it's worthwhile putting in the effort to write a good subject line. Okay, there's a good question from Lizelle. What is the average length for a good subject line? In fact, that's a very good question. Let me go back to this slide because you remind me of something else. So yes, somehow we have it in our minds that a subject line should be 2 or 3 words. That's it. But in fact, your subject line can safely be up to 10 to 12 words. So that's a big sort of implication of what I'm saying here is don't write 2 or 3 word subject lines. You can write longer subject lines. Let me just see another question. If your email needs an answer, should you put that in the subject line? If so, how? That's also a good question. Yes, I would leave that up to you. And I think you need to express it in so many words that it actually takes us to kind of the discussion around the red question mark, which sometimes indicates urgency. So really the feeling is, or my feeling definitely, but a lot of people feel, don't use that red exclamation mark. Rather say in so many words, because first of all, I think most people ignore that red exclamation mark. Secondly, they might become offended thinking you making your urgency their urgency. If something really is urgent, express it in so many words. Get that into the subject line and then be sincere. What about an email that is a reply? Yeah, I guess that's talking about, do you change someone else's subject line? No, don't. Don't mess with someone else's subject line. Generally, people don't like that. Leave the subject line as it is. Yes, there is this question that if there's a long thread or a long discussion going on in an email, by the time you get to the 7th email, the subject has changed. Should you change the subject line? Yeah, that's a very debatable question. And I think kind of the way out of it is, one way out of it is you can change the subject line, but then put the original subject line in brackets, so there's still a reference. And another question quickly, when we teach children to write business letters, we teach formality. This relates to Lee's earlier question to plug in phrase. Schools teach these phrases, should we be changing? Short answer, Melanie, yes, we should be changing. I think at school, there's no harm in teaching this distinction between this is formal, this is, I hesitate to use the word informal because it's often taken in the right way. But I think children should be taught that there's a style of business English that is not formal. In fact, it's doing you a disservice if you're writing that formal. And I think I should make this point because it's kind of coming up here, that what I'm talking about in this session is very entirely related to workplace writing, to business writing. So yes, I think we should be teaching children more about plain language. And you'll run into a lot of opposition. There's a lot of people unhappy about this, but I think we should be. When you put something in the subject line, does that not cause the email to go into spam? Diana's asking. So it depends how you write your subject line. You don't want to, we're saying you want to write your subject line in such a way that it gets the reader's attention. They want to open it, but don't write spam. Don't write it in a spammy way. So you're being sincere. You're not saying you've won the lottery, exclamation mark, now they're going to open it. Be sincere. Say what the email is about. I'm going through these relatively quickly. MailChimp campaigns recommend using emojis in the subject line. You agree. So yeah, it brings us, I guess, to the wider discussion around emojis. And it's a bigger discussion, but I think very quickly is emojis, I think, are where we are today are not professional in the workplace. And this could definitely change. The language has evolved so much in the last 20 to 30 years. Who knows? In 10 years' time, emojis could be completely acceptable in the workplace. And for that matter, I know, for example, First National Bank, when they send you a text message, they use emojis. I think the question of emojis should be governed by an organizational policy, that if your organization says it's fine to use them, then you can. But I think as a blanket response, I would treat emojis as unprofessional. That's the one side. The other side is that emojis often cause a lot of misunderstanding and confusion. They don't clarify things. They don't lead to better communication. At the end of the day, you should be working harder with your words, would be my final answer on that. Okay, I got to move on. Tip number 2, get the tone right. So here's a question, and this is a question to you. Put it in the chat. What is tone, or what is tone in writing? Anyone? Okay, there I've got one answer, 1 second. Nope. Very nice, Joseph. It expresses your mood and feelings. Okay, 100%, straight out. How you come across, thank you, Diana, definitely. Just see if any others. Attitude, okay, 100%. So I'm going to stop it there. Those are great answers. Maybe you're still thinking about more. That's tone. Tone it's slippery. We know it, but sometimes it's hard to pin it down. It's hard to say exactly what it is. But those are the key words. it's mood, it's feeling, it's attitude. Okay, it's how you come across to the other person. So why is tone so important? And I'm going to push this forward a little bit and answer this myself. Why is it so important? There are lots of reasons why it's important. And let me see, just check this answer. Please speak up. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, all right. Okay, so why is tone so important? As I say, many answers, but I think one of the main reasons it's so important is that tone is often the first thing we start interpreting. So we receive a message. I can receive an email. I'm going to use Lisa as my example. Lisa writes me an email and I go, wow, what's wrong with Lisa today? She's being so sarcastic. And then I've already labeled the tone. And so everything from then on, I start interpreting through that tone. And this is just how we are, once again, as humans, that we're extremely sensitive. Whether you believe it or not, we're extremely sensitive to tone. And so we will label, we'll give an email a certain tone. And then from then on, everything that we read in that email is interpreted through that tone. So why is it important to get it right? Is because you want your tone to complement your message. You don't want your tone to hijack your message or undercut your message. It has to complement your message. And yes, no matter how hard we work, we might still get it wrong, but we still have to try. So how do you get it right? Very briefly, you ask yourself 3 questions. Who am I writing to? And what's my relationship to this person? What is my purpose in writing to them? And what result do I want? So you ask yourself those 3 questions. Let me just very quickly just unpack them briefly. So who am I writing to? Yes, you've got to understand, what's my relationship? Is this someone senior, junior? Have they received email from me before? Do we have a good relationship, etc., etc.? Lots of questions you can ask. What is my purpose? Why? Why am I writing this email? The even more important question is, what result do I want? And this question is a very powerful question, because you're asking, as a result of the reader reading my email, what will they do next? And typically there are only 3 answers. They're going to do something, they're going to think something, or they're going to feel something. Now, arguably, those are the only results you can have. But you need to be very clear. What is it I want them to do? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to think? Or a combination of those 3. But you answer those 3 questions, and then you choose the right words, phrases, and sentences. Now, this might sound extremely simplified, but what are we saying in the end is tone comes down to choice. You choose certain words, you achieve one kind of tone. You choose other words, and you're going to achieve a different tone. But yes, you're making the choice in such a way that it addresses those questions above. I'm going to pause for a moment and just see if there are any comments from your side or any questions about tone. And then we'll go to the final tip. Okay, so to the final tip, which takes us to edit and proofread. Now, there's a great book on writing by a chap by the name of William Zinser. And he wrote a book called On Writing Well. And you want to read more about writing or even become a better writer, I highly recommend this book. He has this to say: rewriting is the essence of writing well. It's where the game is won or lost. His terminology is calling it rewriting. I'm calling it editing and proofreading. We could also call it the post-writing stage. So writing has 3 very definite stages. There's pre-writing, there's writing, and there's post-writing. Pre-writing is where we do the planning, we then write, and then we should have a post-writing stage where we edit and proofread, or we even can go as far as rewriting. Now, what Mr. Zinser is saying is very key, because good writing doesn't happen in the writing stage. Good writing happens in the rewriting stage. It's when you go back and you look at what you've written and you make it better. That's where good writing happens. The sad fact is that so many people leave out the post-writing stage. and for many reasons, but I think one reason is we just think this just feels tedious. I mean, we've done our work. Why are we going to go back and look at it and try and make it better? You want to become a better writer, you have to have a most definite post-writing stage where you edit, proofread, and even rewrite. Quick question. Sorry, please speak up. Is it me or is the sound gone? Let me just quickly check. Lisa, the sound's still good?
It's perfect, Michael. I can hear you perfectly.
Okay,
no one else has mentioned anything.
Okay, sorry, Esther. I think it might be on your side.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to plow on. Okay, so just wrapping up this last tip. So what do we do in the post-writing stage? There are many things we can do, but I think the easiest way to understand it is in the post-writing stage, you need to develop fresh eyes. So what do I mean by developing fresh eyes? Is you have to somehow come to your document, your email, your report, whatever it is, and look at it with fresh eyes. So one obvious way, and I'm sure many of us do this, is we put aside the document for a few minutes, a few hours, even better. We then come back and we read it again. We're seeing it with fresh eyes. Another strategy to develop fresh eyes is to print a hard copy. Read a hard copy. Something's different. Something happens differently in our brain when we read a hard copy as opposed to in screen. You're going to find different things. Another strategy, read the document aloud. Again, reading aloud, our brain is functioning differently. We're going to see different things. Your best fresh eyes would be to give your document to someone else because they've never seen it. And lastly, one last tip, and then I'm going to see if there's a question, and you can't do this for all documents, but certainly you can do it for most emails, is read your email from the bottom to the top. So start on the last sentence, read the second to last sentence, the third to last sentence. So you're reading backwards. Why does this give us fresh eyes? Because you're taking every sentence out of context. And you will be amazed what you discover, the mistakes you find when you do that. Okay, let me just check a question. Okay, great, thanks, Joel. All right, let me just go into the summary and then I'm going to open it to any general questions. So, what have we gone through today? We've gone through 3 principles. Put your reader first, be plain, be professional. We spent most of our time there. We've then looked at 3 tips. Write good subject lines, get your tone right, edit, and proofread. So momentarily, let's see if there are any questions. And I'm just going to pause a moment. Yes, let me just have a look. Yeah, good. Question by Belinda. How and when are exclamation marks acceptable? So it's a good question. Use exclamation marks with caution. Okay, exclamation marks is almost like this precursor to the emoji because an exclamation mark is expressing some kind of emotion. So use it with extreme caution. If you are going to use an exclamation mark, only use 1. Okay, not 3 or 4. Terrible. Okay, let me just see other questions coming in. Great. From Michelle, what is better, hi or dear? Yeah, nice question. So it's all about greetings. I should say first off, and I haven't touched on this, but it would link in to courteousness. Always have a greeting. Greet your reader. Don't just start writing whatever you're writing. It's highly discourteous. Think of it if you were speaking to someone face to face. You don't just start speaking. You say something, whatever it is. Hi, hey. So hi or dear. Dear is the default, but hi is completely acceptable. Okay. I wouldn't use it on first contact, especially if there's an email going out of an organization. Once you feel that you've developed a relationship, hi is completely acceptable. Okay, next question. What is the best way to start? Okay, I think I've addressed that. How and when to copy in other people? Yeah, Belinda, that's a great long discussion. I'm not going to get into it. Copying other people in, it's such a nice question. Why do we copy? Why do we put people in CC? So yeah, there's always endless discussions. The common answer is things like, I want to cover my butt, so I put my boss in CC. Or I want to make sure the person responds, so I put their boss in CC. You got to answer that for yourself. And I think you have to have a legitimate reason why you're putting someone in CC. Why? Because there's too much email going around. You don't want to add to this email load. So think hard before you put someone in CC. Be able to answer. If someone had to ask you, why did you put this person in CC? Have a good answer. Yes, sometimes covering your butt is valid. So next question, when one does not have marketing experience, where can one look for inspiration? Not sure how that relates. I don't think that's my field, marketing. I'm going to skip that one. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to think, I think we'll take the last one here. Okay, that was sent to me privately, so I'm not going to address it. I don't know if you want me to address it. Let me just quickly read it. Give me a moment. I think it's quite a nice question. So it's linking into this fact that we all working, many of us are working remotely. So I think what it's saying is, yes, possibly there's a greater need for putting people in CC. I think that's a good point. But I still think you have to be able to justify why have you put the person. Don't just do it unthinkingly. You have to be able to justify why and give a good reason. Here's a nice one quickly. Can you change from dear to hi after your first email? I think you can, but I think you have to sense, you're going to get a sense from the person's reply, how they are viewing the relationship. And if you feel that it's appropriate, yes, I think you can definitely move to hi after the first dear. Okay,
Michael, sorry, Michael, can I ask a quick question?
Go for it, Lisa.
In terms of length of emails, sometimes I find when I receive emails, they just seem to be, there's just so much content and copy, and I'm so mindful of the fact that people don't have much time, to read with, being fully present and to take it all in. So, what is the correct balance in terms of the length of an email?
Yeah, look, I mean, sometimes the guideline is given that on a computer screen, you should be able to read the entire email without scrolling. I think that's a very broad guideline, though. I think a better answer is that if you are reader-centric, you've really thought hard about your reader, you will give them what they need and you will answer their questions. And that might happen in one paragraph, but it might take 5 paragraphs, as long as you are keeping the reader front and center. Yes, I think there comes a point, though, where an email just becomes too long, and then maybe you should consider creating a document and putting the document as an attachment. But those would be my 2 answers. One, that broad guideline, what you can read on one computer screen, but the other is rather just really think hard about your reader. Give them what they need, address their questions, be reader-centered.
And the other question is around font and size, because there's so many options. But what would be the email etiquette for that?
Yeah, look, I mean, every organization has their font, or they should have a standard font. And typically the size is something, it's 11 or 12, whatever the font is. And typically that covers most fonts. Very common fonts are things like Arial, Times New Roman, Century Gothic. These seem to be the most common fonts. It's got to be something readable. Don't go fancy just because you think it looks great. This is like the very physical side of readability. It needs to be a good readable font. Typically in terms of size, though, 11 to 12, and definitely it doesn't entirely relate to your question, but I want to say this, standardize the font. Make sure everyone in your organization is using the same font. It sounds so obvious, but I've seen it in organizations where people just use their own font. It's terrible. Okay, I think there has to be a high degree of standardization. Okay, so I'm going to just wrap up very quickly. 2 things. If you still have questions, I see there's some in the chat. If I haven't got to them, I'm sorry. Please send me an email. That's my email address, michael@thelanguageboss.com. You can check out the website. And I want to finish on a quote. We started with a quote. I want to finish with a quote. The quote is by this gentleman with this wonderful shock of gray hair. You might know who he is. His name is Steven Pinker. He's an academic in the US at Harvard University. His fields are psychology, linguistics, and some years ago he wrote a book on writing. And the book was called The Sense of Style, with this very nice subtitle, The Thinking Person's Guide to Writing in the 21st Century. Another great book on writing. And the quote I'm pulling out, it ties in very nicely with a lot of what we've been talking about. The quote is both giving you advice on how to become a good writer, but he's also saying why writing matters. Good writing matters. As he says, always try to lift yourself out of your parochial, your limited, narrow mindset, and find out how other people think and feel. It may not make you a better person in all spheres of life, but it'll be a source of continuing kindness to your readers. So we're back to put your reader first. Okay, thank you very much and take care, and thanks for those questions that came in.
Michael, thank you. That was really awesome. Practical, easy to understand, and I'm nervous about putting my emails out there. Maybe I should send them to you first to proofread for me, but which I've done in the past, and you've always helped me so beautifully. So thank you for that. Everyone, thanks for joining us. I hope you found it insightful and beneficial. I'll send you the recording later today. But honestly, Michael, it's really been a privilege. Thank you and all the best.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Lisa. Bye-bye.
Ciao.